In the shadowed heart of 1347, a silent terror crossed the Mediterranean on trading ships from the east, carrying not just spices and silk, but an invisible enemy that would unravel the fabric of medieval Europe. The Black Death arrived without fanfare, yet within months it transformed bustling ports into ghost towns where the living whispered prayers amid the growing stench of decay. Collective fear did not erupt overnight. It seeped into the souls of millions like a slow poison, turning neighbors into suspects and faith into fragile armor against the unknown. This was no ordinary plague. It was a cataclysm that exposed the deepest fractures in human society, where panic spread faster than the disease itself, accelerating a collapse that reshaped civilization. The air thickened with dread, church bells tolled endlessly, and families barricaded doors against an enemy they could neither see nor fight. Historians would later call it the greatest mortality event in European history. But for those who lived through it, it was the end of the world as they knew it, a moment when collective fear became the true architect of social breakdown. Before the first buboes appeared, Europe in the early 14th century pulsed with the rhythms of a recovering medieval world. Cities like Florence, Paris, and London swelled with merchants, artisans, and peasants, drawn by expanding trade routes along the Silk Road. Daily life unfolded in crowded markets where the scent of fresh bread mingled with livestock and leather, while Gothic cathedrals rose toward the heavens as symbols of divine order. Families gathered around hearths for simple meals, children played in narrow streets, and feudal lords oversaw vast manors where serfs toiled under predictable cycles of planting and harvest. The church held unchallenged authority, promising salvation in a world still scarred by earlier famines and wars. Yet beneath this surface stability, the population had grown rapidly, straining resources and creating a delicate balance that few recognized as precarious. People moved with the confidence of generations who had survived Viking raids and Mongol threats, believing their institutions, monarchies, guilds, and monasteries. The warm summer breezes carried laughter and haggling, but no one sensed that the interconnected world they had built would soon become the perfect vector for unimaginable horror. The earliest warning signs were invisible, dismissed as mere misfortune or divine displeasure. Strange reports filtered in from the Crimean Peninsula, tales of a mysterious sickness decimating Tatar armies and Genoese traders alike. Fleas carried by black rats aboard merchant vessels slipped unnoticed into the holds of ships docking in Messina, Sicily. At first, isolated deaths seemed unremarkable. Perhaps spoiled grain or bad air, the miasma theory that physicians clung to. Chroniclers noted unusual weather patterns, failed harvests in previous years, and rising grain prices that hinted at underlying vulnerabilities. But the true harbingers were subtler. Increased trade volume that knit distant regions together, overcrowded urban centers with poor sanitation, and a population already weakened by malnutrition. Priests preached sermons on sin and repentance, while astrologers blamed planetary alignments. No one understood that the bacterium Yersinia pestis was rewriting the rules of survival. The collapse did not begin with chaos. It began quietly, in the creak of ship timbers and the scurrying of rodents in the dark. Collective unease stirred faintly, like distant thunder, but daily routines continued, masking the gathering storm. As the plague took hold in port cities, rising tension gripped communities with an iron fist. Bodies began piling up faster than they could be buried, and fear mutated into suspicion. Travelers were turned away at city gates, yet the disease infiltrated anyway, jumping from household to household. Markets emptied as vendors fled or perished, and the once vibrant streets fell silent, except for the occasional wail of the dying. Rumor and panic fueled accusations against Jews, lepers, and outsiders, leading to pogroms that only deepened the social rift. The wealthy retreated to isolated estates, while the poor faced the brunt in fetid slums where the sick were abandoned to die alone. Physicians in beak masks stuffed with herbs offered futile remedies, their silhouettes haunting the narrow alleys like specters. Families fractured under the strain, parents deserting children, children fleeing infected parents, eroding the bonds that held society together. The air grew heavy with the acrid smoke of bonfires lit to purify the atmosphere, but nothing could dispel the pervasive dread. By the time the signs became unmistakable, the invisible threads of commerce, faith, and kinship were already fraying, and collective fear accelerated the disintegration. Key decisions and mounting pressures sealed the fate of countless regions. Monarchs and city councils issued edicts for quarantines that arrived too late, while the church struggled to maintain order amid dwindling clergy. Flagellant movements emerged, groups of penitents whipping themselves in public processions, believing self-mortification could appease an angry God, yet their travels only spread the contagion further. Economic pressures intensified as labor shortages drove up wages, challenging feudal structures that had endured for centuries. Lords faced rebellious peasants unwilling to work fields littered with corpses, and trade guilds collapsed under the weight of absent members. Political leaders prioritized containment over compassion, sometimes ordering the sealing of houses with entire families inside, condemning the healthy alongside the ill. These choices, born of desperation and limited knowledge, amplified the breakdown. The psychological toll was immense. Sermons that once comforted now instilled terror, and the certainty of salvation felt hollow against the randomness of death. But no one understood what was coming next, as old certainties crumbled, and survival instincts overrode centuries of social norms. The moment the system began to fail arrived with horrifying swiftness in the summer of 1348. Entire villages were wiped out in weeks, their fields untended and livestock wandering free. In Florence, as described by Boccaccio, the living barely sufficed to bury the dead, and mass graves scarred the landscapes. Social hierarchies inverted overnight, servants inherited wealth, while nobles perished without heirs. Law and order evaporated as theft became commonplace and authorities powerless. The church, decimated by losses among its ranks, faced a crisis of faith. Some priests fled while others died administering last rites. Fear paralyzed economies, ships rotted in harbors, mills stood idle, and once thriving universities emptied. The collective psyche shifted from hope to resignation, then to primal survival. People moved like ghosts through abandoned streets, avoiding eye contact, their faces etched with exhaustion and suspicion. Silence replaced the hum of daily commerce, broken only by the carts collecting bodies at night. This rupture was irreversible, a tipping point where the accumulated pressures of fear shattered institutional frameworks that had defined European life for generations. Human consequences unfolded in waves of profound social breakdown. Orphans roamed the countryside in bands, forming makeshift families amid the ruins. Widows and widowers navigated a world stripped of support networks, leading to rapid remarriages driven by economic necessity rather than affection. Violence erupted in the vacuum of authority, looting, revenge killings, and desperate uprisings against perceived hoarders of grain. Mental anguish manifested in widespread hysteria, with visions and apocalyptic prophecies fueling millenarian cults. The stench of unburied dead permeated cities, while survivors grappled with survivors' guilt and the erosion of trust. Children witnessed horrors that no generation should endure, their innocence replaced by a hardened pragmatism. Families that once shared meals now mourned in isolation, and the communal rituals of birth, marriage, and death were upended. Collective fear had not only killed bodies, but hollowed out the spirit of communities, leaving psychological scars that would echo for decades. The living envied the dead their peace, while grappling with a reality where death was the only certainty. In the long term, the Black Death's legacy reshaped the trajectory of Western civilization in profound and unexpected ways. Labor shortages empowered surviving peasants to demand better conditions, weakening feudalism and sowing seeds for later social mobility. Art and literature took on darker, more realistic tones, as seen in works reflecting mortality and human frailty. The Church's authority waned, paving the way for reformist ideas that would culminate in the Protestant Reformation centuries later. Economies reoriented toward wage labor and new trade patterns, accelerating the transition toward modernity. Scientific inquiry gained subtle momentum as traditional explanations failed, though true medical advances were slow. Demographic recovery took generations, but the psychological imprint of collective trauma influenced everything from governance to cultural memory. The event demonstrated how fear, when amplified across societies, could dismantle empires not through invasion, but through internal dissolution. A lesson that reverberates through subsequent crises in human history. Yet even as Europe slowly rebuilt, the haunting echoes of that collective fear lingered like ghosts in the collective memory. Survivors passed down stories of streets lined with the dying, of skies darkened by funeral pyres, reminding each new generation of civilization's fragility. The Black Death was not merely a biological event but a mirror revealing humanity's vulnerability to panic and rupture. In moments of later upheaval, wars, revolutions, pandemics, the same patterns of fear-driven breakdown would re-emerge, proving that the true collapse often begins not with external forces, but within the human heart. The silence after the bells stopped tolling carried a warning. When societies confront the abyss, it is fear that determines whether they endure or fracture forever. Those who lived through it understood that progress is illusory, and the next invisible enemy may already be among us, waiting for the right conditions to unleash chaos once more. The ruins of the old world gave birth to a new one, but at what cost to the soul of humanity?